the door closes, and from the outside, everything sounds normal. But your neighbor knows something you don't. They know exactly when the barking starts, how long it lasts, which days are worse, because they're there to hear it. You're not. When you come home, your dog looks completely fine. Maybe a little excited, maybe a little tired, like nothing really happened while you were gone. But then you notice it. The cushion slightly out of place, the corner of the rug that wasn't like that this morning. A shoe moved just enough to feel wrong, and that very specific kind of silence. From a dog that seems just a little too still, most people assume it's boredom, or mischief, maybe just a bad day. But behavioral neuroscience tells a completely different story. Because what's actually happening inside your dog's brain doesn't start after you leave. It starts earlier, while you're still in the house, before you even reach for your keys. Let's start with what happens after you leave. In 2010, a research team at the University of Milan did something most dog owners never do. They set up cameras inside the home and walked out. What they recorded wasn't subtle. Vocalization, barking, whining, howling began on average just 3 minutes and 15 seconds after departure. Destructive behavior followed within 7 minutes. 7 minutes. That's how long it takes before the shoes are at risk. But here's where it gets interesting. The noise doesn't last forever. The barking slows down. The scratching fades. And from the outside, it looks like the dog has settled. It hasn't. As the sound decreases, something else increases. Panting rises. Heart rate stays elevated. The dog hasn't calmed down. It has changed how the distress shows up. And over time, researchers noticed a pattern. Every 20 to 30 minutes, another spike, another burst of movement. Then silence again, not settling, cycling. But here's where most people get it wrong. The problem doesn't start when you leave. It starts while you're still there. In the 1980s, veterinary behaviorists Borchell and Voy documented something that has been replicated again and again since. Dogs with separation anxiety don't wait for the door to close. Their stress response begins earlier, sometimes minutes earlier, because your dog isn't reacting to the absence itself. It's reacting to the signals that predict it. You check your phone, you put on your shoes, you pick up your keys. Each of those actions, repeated hundreds of times, becomes part of a chain. And that chain leads to one outcome your dog has learned with absolute certainty. You're about to disappear. By the time you reach the door, some dogs are already panting. Some are pacing. Some are following you from room to room, not because they're clingy, but because they know what comes next. So naturally, the advice most owners hear is this: break the association. Pick up your keys randomly, put on your shoes, and sit back down. Make your departures unpredictable. But here's the problem. In 2014, researchers at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona reviewed this exact strategy, and the results were more complicated than expected. For some dogs, it didn't reduce anxiety. It increased it, because the issue was never the keys. It was the uncertainty. Your dog isn't afraid of your shoes. Your dog is afraid of not knowing when or if you're coming back. And when you make those signals unreliable, you don't remove the fear. You remove the last thing the dog could use to prepare for it. So instead of predictable stress, you create constant anticipation. And anticipation in the brain is often worse than the event itself. That's the shift most people miss. This isn't a behavior problem. It's a prediction problem. There's a second layer happening, and it's the one most owners never see. In the Generation Pup study by the Royal Veterinary College, researchers tracked over 100 dogs through their early development, looking for what actually predicts separation-related problems. And what they found surprised a lot of trainers. It wasn't emotional goodbyes. It was what happened when the owner came back. Dogs whose owners returned to damage and reacted with frustration, raised voices, tension, visible upset, were significantly more likely to develop anxiety. Because your dog doesn't connect your reaction to what happened hours ago. There's no timeline for that. What they connect it to is your arrival. So now, both ends of the absence carry stress. You leave, they panic. You return, they brace. And over time, something shifts. In the 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman described a phenomenon called learned helplessness. When animals are exposed to stress they cannot control, they don't fight forever. They stop. Not because they're okay, but because their brain has learned that nothing they do changes the outcome. So the barking fades, the movement slows, and from the outside, it looks like calm. It isn't. But there's one more layer, and it changes how you see the entire problem. In 2019, researchers at Linköping University measured long-term cortisol levels in dog owner pairs using hair samples. Not momentary stress, not a bad day, chronic accumulated stress over weeks and months, and what they found was striking. The levels were synchronized: stressed owner, stressed dog, calm owner, calm dog. But here's the part that matters most. When they looked at direction, which one was influencing the other, it wasn't the dog driving the human, it was the human shaping the dog. Which means your dog doesn't start the day from zero, it starts from a baseline already set by the environment you both share. So when you leave for 8 hours, those 8 hours aren't happening in isolation, but they're happening on top of everything your dog's nervous system is already carrying. Now compare that to how most solutions are designed: pheromone diffusers, white noise machines, puzzle toys. Most of them are trying to fix the 8 hours you're gone. But the real problem was built in the other 16. That's why so many of these tools show little to no effect in controlled studies. They don't change the prediction. And prediction is everything, because what your dog is actually reacting to is not the absence itself, but what its brain believes that absence means. So what does work? Something that feels almost too simple to matter. You leave for a few seconds, you come back, you repeat, again and again and again. Not long enough for panic to begin, not long enough for the nervous system to spike, and just enough to rewrite one expectation: that leaving does not mean losing you. And at a certain point, usually around 40 minutes, something shifts. The pattern breaks. Because your dog is no longer guessing. It knows. Leaving and returning are not two separate events. They are the same event, just experienced in a different order. So the next time you come home to a quiet house and a dog that looks completely fine, pause for a second, because what you're seeing on the surface might not be the full story. That silence doesn't always mean calm. That stillness doesn't always mean comfort. Sometimes it means the system has simply stopped reacting, not because nothing happened, but because nothing it did changed the outcome. That's not misbehavior. That's not boredom. And it's definitely not your dog acting out. That's a nervous system trying to cope with the absence of the one system it has learned to regulate itself against, yours. And once you see it that way, the goal stops being control. It becomes understanding, because your dog isn't asking you to never leave. It's trying to learn something much harder: that you always come back. Like, if this changed how you see what happens when you're gone, subscribe and leave a comment below. Does your dog show signs before you even reach for your keys? Because in the next video, we're breaking down another behavior that looks simple on the surface, but is anything but.